Hello everyone. Thank you so much to you all who have subscribed to the channel. Much appreciation to you all. I am asking more people to join the channel please. Let us do this together. Thank you. We are talking Kenya. The main problem at the forefront right now is the increase of taxation. The majority of people in Kenya are poor. Some people are practically on survival mode. How are they going to withstand any tax, however little? The pain and anger was exasperated when the president hired a private luxury jet to go to the USA for $1.5 million, instead of using the national airline Kenya Airways, which would have cost $500,000. This means that the president and the politicians have a spending problem and not an income problem. The police battling anti-tax demonstrators comes to the forefront of it all. It looks this is going to spread all over the country. Kenyans stand up in solidarity. If Ruto does not take this seriously, then he will be in real trouble because the protesters may turn violent. The president must remember that he is running the country and not rearing chickens. Let us hope that the president is well informed that the young people demonstrating on the streets of Kenya will not relent. They want to see results and they want to see accountability. For the people looking in from outside, one can quickly see that the problem is not paying taxes. The real problem is that people are paying higher taxes for the corrupt politicians, who are constantly looting money. What is happening in Kenya is very common to a lot of African countries. This is where you find African leaders and members of parliament comfortably earning more than Western leaders. The greediness of politicians is too much, and if they have any conscience, they should be ashamed of themselves. The Kenyan citizens have had enough. They can no longer pay taxes to fuel presidents' jets. The rate and appetite for public theft has increased tenfolds while there are no jobs or income for the average citizens to improve themselves. People are experiencing pain, and some would like to see the president leave office, and preferably seek for asylum in Washington. Demonstrators protest against proposed tax hikes in a finance bill that will leave some people in dire poverty and deprivation. There is a large gap between the rich and poor, with approximately 70% of Kenyan families chronically vulnerable due to poor nutrition, food insecurity. Many Kenyans suffer from economic inequality, while a minority elite continues to exploit their labor, resources, and opportunities. Let us take a listen to the video, and I will catch you at the other end. Ruto's
Undeterred by clouds of choking tear gas, these young Kenyans are taking to the streets in their thousands with a clear demand. They oppose the government's plan to raise $2.7 billion in additional taxes under pressure from the International Monetary Fund. The protest dubbed Occupied Parliament started in Nairobi on Tuesday and have since spread nationwide.
This bill, we can't let it pass. We want to reject it completely, and that's why we're here. It's our duty to protest against the bill.
Kenya is lived by poverty. We have no education. Most of our people are unlearned. They cannot write, they cannot read. And the government still wants to pull away the budget.
Roads around Parliament were sealed, with both the noise and the message seemingly not reaching politicians. They held a second reading of the bill on Tuesday, but not all agreed.
This bill was a disaster. This bill is assuming that the Kenyans' tax rate should move to a higher rate region.
President William Ruto had made amendments to the bill, dropping levies on bread, transport of sugar, financial services and motor vehicle tax, proposing instead to increase fuel prices. The new budget is a response to the IMF, which has called the government to increase revenues to reduce its reliance on borrowing. But with high unemployment, inflation, and a third of the country living in poverty, many see these additional taxes as punishing the poor. And the way police handled the protests may have worsened the anger on the streets. Gillian Munyeo says her son was shot dead while fleeing from tear gas.
If someone is fighting for their rights, why use live bullets? If he would have been found with any weapons, he would have said there is a problem, but he was walking with his friend.
Rights groups who attended Thursday's protests say spent cartridges implied the use of live rounds.
It's really shocking to learn that we are living in a country where youth are losing their lives for merely exercising their constitutional rights.
But nothing appears to deter these young Kenyans who say they will remain on the streets until the government scraps its controversial plans to raise taxes. Laura Khan for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
Ruto's government underestimated the Gen Z generation. They have refused to be silenced. This is an enormous social phenomenon with huge political implications for Kenya and beyond. Kenyan police have clashed with anti-tax protesters in the capital, Nairobi, as demonstrators have spread across the country, including to the president's hometown of Eldoret. Anti-riot police, some on horseback, fired tear gas to disperse crowds of protesters on the streets of Nairobi. There were similar protests in other cities and major towns across the country, including Eldoret, Kisumu, Nakuru, and Nyeri. There is a palpable anger among many Kenyans over the controversial finance bill that has introduced a number of unpopular tax proposals. Despite the complaints, the controversial bill was passed by a majority of MPs during the second reading stage. It will now go to the next stage where a committee will consider amendments related to the proposed taxes. As the protests started last Tuesday, the public outcry forced the government to withdraw some of contentious provisions, including a 16% tax on bread and an annual 2.5% tax on vehicles. The protesters say this is not enough and have demanded that legislators, who are currently debating the bill in Parliament, to reject the entire bill. It is good to see young people stand up for what they believe to be right. This current protest is being driven by young people rather than politicians and have been mostly peaceful. These Gen Z generation are so well organized they do have the action points plan. They started rallying from June 21st, and it runs on past June 25, 2024. The media is keeping the Gen Z generation active and well organized. President William Ruto says, Kenyans pay less tax than citizens in some other African countries. Well, Kenyans are learning the truth of the old adage that taxes, along with death, are the only two certainties of life. Ruto is trying to convince Kenyans that they should hand over their hard-earned money, saying that, if anything, they are undertaxed. The president argued that Kenyans have been socialized to believe they pay the highest taxes, when in fact, he added, the overall tax burden was lower compared to some other countries in Africa and beyond. Since he was elected president in August 2022, Mr. Ruto's government has raised a host of taxes while also introducing new ones. Taxes on salaries have gone up, the sales tax on fuel has doubled, and people are also paying a new housing levy and are due to pay more for health insurance. Mr. Ruto's message is that if people want better public services and a reduction in the country's debt burden, then they have to pay up. But many are angry at the suggestion and the imposition. The imposition of some of the taxes, amid the rising cost of living, led to deadly street protests last year. Today, ordinary conversations are often dominated by the pain of taxation, and the president's view has exasperated Kenyans who already feel overburdened. Mr. Ruto also went to say that last year's government tax revenue amounted to 14% of the value of the economy as a whole, a figure that is known as the tax-to-GDP ratio, whereas the number for Kenya's peers in the continent is on average between 22% and 25%. This means our taxes are way below those of our peers, the president insisted. It is not clear which countries the president meant exactly. The opposition figure and lawyer Miguna summed up the incredulity that many felt. He said, Kenyans are overtaxed, repressed, exploited, and abused. Despite the uproar, more taxes will be coming soon. The president has made a case for increasing taxes in the next couple of years to at least a 20% GDP by the end of his term in 2027. He has defended the rise of more taxes in order to boost his government revenue and reduce borrowing. Kenya has a national debt of nearly $80 billion, much of it inherited from the previous administrations. Already, the government's budget proposal for the next financial year introduces new measures that seem unpopular, including a mandatory tax for car owners and sales taxes on bread, as well as financial transactions. Some Kenyans have complained that a combination of inflation and higher taxes have made goods harder to afford. Despite all these many taxes, Kenyans still have to pay school fees, hospital bills, and also you have to pay for all public services. This is a double taxation all across the board. The Kenyan police have been using tear gas, water cannon as hundreds of protesters went to the streets to protest over the tax hikes. Please kindly subscribe on the channel. You and me, let us build this channel together. Thank you. Let us continue. The tax collector President Ruto has brought chaos to the streets of Nairobi. He is the most unpopular president in the Kenyan history. Police in Kenya have fired tear gas and used water cannon to disperse protesters gathering near Parliament in the capital to demonstrate against planned tax hikes that many fear will worsen the cost of living crisis in the country. Tense scenes played out in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya last week, as hundreds took to the street in opposition to a finance bill, which proposes introducing new taxes and levies that will increase the price of basic goods. Life is already too hard for the majority of poor people of Kenya. The tax increases are projected to raise 346 billion shillings, which is equivalent to 1.9% of gross domestic product, and reduce the budget deficit from 5.7% to 3.3% of GDP. The cash-strapped government of President Ruto agreed to make concessions last week, watering down the bill after hundreds of mostly young protesters clashed with police. The government will still go ahead with some tax increases and has defended the proposed hikes as necessary for filling its coffers and cutting reliance on external borrowing. Angry demonstrators have decided to continue to stage demonstrations across the country, including in the Indian Ocean city of Mombasa and the lakeside city of Kisumu, both opposition bastions. A lot of protesters are young and social media users. It looks very different from the kinds of protests that we saw in Kenya just over a year ago, called for by the political opposition, and also about the rising cost of living. The cost of living has been going up on and off since the global COVID-19 pandemic. Kenyans are fed up of the increased taxation. The increased austerity measures that keep on targeting the poorest of the citizens is becoming very uncomfortable for most of the young people and poor people. There is a very interesting group that has been brought to the fore, which is Generation Z. This group has been extremely disinterested in the elections and in voting. But for some reason, this time they are very keen and are the ones on the streets protesting about increase in taxation. Especially because some of the taxes are going to be imposed on digital content creation, which is a space that they do dominate. Younger Kenyans have also seen their parents' financial struggles under a government that is completely insensitive to their needs, which is causing them to react this way. The presidency announced on Tuesday the removal of proposed levies on bread purchases, car ownership, as well as financial and mobile services, prompting a warning from the Treasury of a 200 billion shilling shortfall as a result of the budget cuts. The whole taxation increase is seen as a tax on the poor and should be scrapped. However, the government has decided to increase fuel prices and export taxes to fill the void left by the changes, a move most critics say will make life more expensive in a country already battling high inflation. The East African powerhouse relies on diesel for transportation, power generation, and agriculture, while kerosene is used by many households for cooking and lighting. The protests were largely peaceful, although police also fired volleys of tear gas. At least 333 people were arrested, according to the consortium of lobby groups, including the Human Rights Commission and Amnesty Kenya.